Welcome to our class on our connection to the land of Israel, especially in light of what's going on today. It's an appropriate topic to discuss. But before we begin, I just want to recite a psalm, Psalm 20, very powerful psalm. I'll say it in Hebrew, then I'll translate it into English. Lam natseach mizmer leDavid, yancha Adonai b'yom tzara. Yisargev Shem Elahei Yankov Yishlach Ezecham Ikedesh Umitzian Yisadeka Yiskar Kol Min Chisecha Ve'iloscha Yidash Nesela Yiten Lecha Chilavavecha V'chalatzascha Yimalei V'ranin Abishuasecha V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgail Yimalei Adonai Kol Mishalei Secha Ata Yadaiti Keshi Adonai Mashiachai Yaneu Mishmei Kachai Bigvurais Yesha Yaminai Elev Orechev V'Elev Asusim V'anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir Heima Korov V'Nafolo V'anachnu Kamen V'Neseidad Adonai Heshia HaMelech Yaneinu V'Yom Kareinu. This is a psalm that was for the choir master, a psalm by David. May the Lord answer you on the day of distress. May the name of the God of Jacob fortify you. May he send your help from the sanctuary and support you from Zion. May he remember all your offerings and always accept favorably your sacrifices. May he grant you your heart's desire and fulfill your every counsel. We will rejoice in your deliverance and raise our banners in the name of our God. May the Lord fulfill all your wishes. Now I know that the Lord has delivered his anointed one, answering him from his holy heavens with the mighty saving power of his right hand. Some rely upon chariots and some upon horses, but we rely upon and invoke the name of the Lord our God. They bend and fall, but we rise and stand firm. Lord, deliver us. May the King answer us on the day we call. The topic of Israel has always touched the hearts of Jews. Something about Israel that unifies Jewish people, but never have the Jewish people been unified as much as they are today. Of course, there are some holdouts, some crazies, but we're talking about the normal Jew who was indifferent in the past. Now we cannot be indifferent. Today we have to recognize what is really going on. There's a biblical verse that speaks about how the Jewish people are Am Levadad Yishkon. They are a nation that dwells by itself in isolation. We see how the whole world, with exceptions, and those are important exceptions, but the world at large has turned against us when we would think that this is a time when everyone would recognize evil for what it is. And there are millions of people who go around justifying the worst evil as if they were justifying what Hitler wanted to do with a final solution. And they're saying that the same thing should happen today. So we have to recognize that we are a nation that stands by ourselves, and we should be proud of it, and not think that that's a sign that we're weak or that we're maybe on the wrong side of things. You know, everyone seems to think what we're doing is wrong, so maybe they have some point to it. No, we have to recognize the truth of our ways and the superior morality of our ways. When we talk about the Jewish claim to Israel, I made a list of 7 different arguments. And what I wanted to say at the outset that all of the arguments, some are better, some are worse, but even the best of the arguments, except for one, even we, if we were told this is a classroom and we're told we want you to take both sides of the debate, argue for the state of Israel, and then give me an argument against it, refute your earlier arguments. If we're intelligent people, we can probably find some flaws in almost every argument. They may not be fatal flaws, but they might weaken the argument. There's one argument that there cannot be anything about it that's not solid. The only thing that the enemy could say is, we don't accept your premise. But we have to know what our premise is. We have to know that we're basing it on something that's solid and cannot be compromised, cannot be challenged. So what are the arguments? There's the argument of conquest. Every society in the world has undergone conquest. Could you think of any society that hasn't been conquered by another society or conquered before by another society? There is no such thing. Maybe there's some tribe that we're not aware of in the Amazon that hasn't conquered it from an earlier tribe, but I doubt that is the case. So, conquest might makes right. Whoever conquers is now the proprietor, now the owner of that piece of land. So we conquered Israel, so it's ours. A similar argument, but somewhat different, is the argument of possession. Whoever is in possession of something, that's the one who is the rightful owner of it. Possession, they say in America, is 9/10 of the law. Then there's the legal argument. International law established the state of Israel, accepted the fact that partition plan, and first before that we had the Balfour Declaration. The international community established Israel legally as a legal entity. The next argument is that Jews need a place of refuge. Look what happened at the Holocaust. If we had the state of Israel, the argument goes, before the Holocaust, there may not have been a Holocaust. I'm not arguing with these arguments yet. I'm just going to present them one by one and then go through them individually. Then the argument is that we need a homeland. Every nation has a homeland, which is not totally true, but every nation is entitled to a homeland. So we're entitled, the Jewish people are entitled to a homeland. The Muslims have dozens of countries that are their homeland. We're entitled to at least one. Argument number 6 is the historical argument, that Jews have a historical presence in Israel. For thousands of years, Jews have lived in Israel. I don't know if there was even one period in history where Jews did not live in Israel. In spite of the fact that we were driven out, we still held on to it tenaciously. And we had Jews present there throughout history. And then the final argument is the biblical argument. The Torah makes it very clear that God gave the land of Israel to Abraham and to his descendants. So you'll argue, oh, descendants? Abraham had another son, Yishmael. So the Torah tells us very clearly that Abraham took his son Yishmael and his 6 other sons that he sired later. He gave them gifts and he sent them away. And before that, Yishmael was thrown out of the house by Sarah. And she says, I will not allow this kid to inherit our legacy in space of Isaac. And Abraham felt bad. It's his son, it's his kid. And God says, what does God say to Abraham? Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. Your children will go through Isaac, not Yishmael. Yishmael is not going to be traced to you. Only Isaac is traced to you. And only Isaac will inherit the land that I promised to you. It'll go through Isaac. But alas, Isaac had 2 sons. He had Jacob and Esau. And again, God tells Jacob that I'm giving the land to you and to your children exclusively. So it's clear from the biblical narrative that the land of Israel was given to Abraham through Isaac and through Jacob and through his progeny, and to the exclusion of everyone else. And this has been repeated dozens, if not hundreds of times in all of biblical literature, how the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. This is the ultimate and really the only solid argument. Now, I'm not saying that the Arabs are going to buy it. They don't buy it, of course, although some of them do actually. But the majority of them, I think it's safe to assume, do not accept the Bible. They don't believe in the Bible. They believe in their supposed holy book. They don't believe in the Torah. Some of them actually do, but most probably don't. But I'm not arguing in order to convince them. You're not going to convince them with all these other arguments. Even if they would be irrefutable, you're not going to convince them because there's no desire for truth. In fact, there's no desire in truth in the place that you would think people are looking for truth, in the universities. The university is the source of lies in this world. They are the most corrupt institution in the world, the American and universities and worldwide as well, along with the general media. Are there any exceptions? Whenever I generalize, you have to realize I'm generalizing, which by definition means that there could be exceptions, but those exceptions are very limited, unfortunately. What's wrong with all these other arguments? Conquest, you set yourself up for another conquest. If, God forbid, Hamas would have succeeded even more, they did conquer part of Israel. For 24 hours or so, they were the owners of that part of Israel. Does that make it theirs? Are we going to accept that argument? Possession has the same weakness. The land transfers from one possession to another. The legal international law is one of the weakest arguments. Do you know why? Because the same international law that giveth can also taketh. You know, there's an expression about God gives and God takes. May the name of God be blessed. Well, they use this in their own evil way. That the same law, the same UN, the same accursed UN that established Israel as a state is now denying Israel the right to defend itself. With all the other attacks against Israel repeatedly for the last few decades, and now it even got worse. So you can't rely on international law. The fact that it's a refuge for the Jewish people could be argued against. It means at the expense of the Arabs, because you need a place of refuge. That's why we should leave our homes. If someone comes to your home and says, I need a place of refuge, someone wants to attack me, can I take your home from you? Of course not. So how could you use that argument that we need a refuge? If we had this refuge, we wouldn't have had the Holocaust. The fact that it's our homeland, yes, it's true. A nation needs and deserves a homeland. But number one, not all nations have a homeland. You know, there's a nation called Kurdistan. They have 40 million people, and they're spread through Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And they'll never have a homeland the way things are going. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. But homeland is a good argument, but it has its own shortcomings. Because why should I have the right to make this land my homeland at someone else's expense? So all these arguments, we can go back and forth and refute the refutation. But if you want to convince someone who's against you, who hates you, who wants to destroy you, none of these arguments are going to hold sway. The only argument that we should apply to ourselves and be consistent with it is that God gave us the land. We didn't take it. If it was up to us, we would have never taken this land. This would be the last place in the world that Jews would have gravitated towards. We took it because we were told it's given to us and we must inherit the land. And that commandment, according to many opinions, applies even today. According to Nachmanides, not to be confused with Maimonides, Nachmanides was another major Talmudic figure, a Jewish leader, a half century after Maimonides, who was considered to be the greatest rabbi of his time, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. And he writes that the commandment in the Torah to inherit the land and settle it exists to this day. We are all obligated to inherit the land and settle it. According to Nachmanides, it's a mitzvah. It's a commandment for every Jew to live in Israel. Maimonides doesn't go that far. Maimonides does not consider it to be an outright obligation, but he considers it to be a desirable thing for a Jew to live in Israel. So then the question is, what am I doing here? And the answer is, the Jewish people have to all live in Israel. And since Jews are not interested in moving to Israel, we have to cater to the Jews who live all over the world to provide them with Jewish knowledge and Jewish practice. But that's a separate subject. But the idea that Israel is ours is not because we took it in 1948, or it was given to us by the UN, or by the British, or by the United States, or the United Nations. It's ours because God says, it's yours, you must keep it. You must treasure it, you must keep it, and protect it. What does the Jewish religion think about Israel? It's not really the same thing that we think about other countries that we like. As Americans, we're very appreciative of the United States. We're loyal, we're patriotic, and that's part of Judaism, to be patriotic to the country, to the host country. But there's a difference between the way we relate to America and to the way we relate to Israel. I think I mentioned this in a class not too long ago, but some of you knew of Gerda Klein. She was a Holocaust survivor, and she wrote many books and a very popular speaker. She was once asked, don't you have divided loyalties? You're citizens of the United States, but you're also supportive of Israel. So she said that the love to Israel is like the love to her parents, and the love of the United States is the love to her spouse. They're not contradictory. They're of a different nature. I would not put it that way. I would put it rather that we're talking about a completely different level of love or appreciation, of respect, of reverence. We're talking about a spiritual relationship and a physical relationship. Sure, the United States is a host country that's keeping us safe so far. We have to pray that the government doesn't reverse itself, although universities have still not stepped up to the plate to take the anti-Semitism that's rampant now seriously. Someone wrote, an Israeli, I saw this a headline, I didn't read the whole article, but an Israeli university leader said, why are you putting much more emphasis on protecting the rights of pronouns and not the rights of Jews who are being threatened and attacked? Very powerful way of putting it, but it seems that even when they condemn Hamas, it's like a perfunctory condemnation, and we don't want to really get upset the Arabs. You mean they can advocate genocide? The word genocide is such a meaningless word now. If you sneeze the wrong way, you're guilty of genocide in the minds of people, and the media will publish those things and accept them as being reality. The only place where genocide is really threatened is against the Jews. No one is trying to wipe out all Muslims, all Arabs, all Palestinians. It's the farthest thing from the minds of any Jew in the world. And the Arabs know that, but their tactic is to throw everything that they're guilty of back at us as if we're guilty of it. And how do you defend yourself? We call them Nazis, so they call us Nazis. The word Nazi doesn't mean anything anymore. But we have a different view of Israel. In the Torah, it tells us that God watches over the land of Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. But God watches over the whole world. So what does it mean that God watches over Israel? So the explanation is that God watches over Israel in a way that is qualitatively different from the rest of the world. How to explain that theologically, philosophically is a separate topic. But there's a special relationship, just like a parent cares about his neighbors as well, but he still has a greater degree of supervision and care for his children. Same thing, God has a special relationship, and he watches over Israel in a way that he doesn't do with any other country. It's a land of milk and honey, which is not said about any other country. The land of Israel demands things of us that no other country does. There are laws in Israel that apply only in Israel, agricultural laws. Every 7 years, the land has to remain fallow. You can't plant. All the produce in that 7th year is free for all, free for anyone to take. So how does Israel survive with that? So there are two systems, which is a topic for another time. How to survive without working on the land. The Talmud says that there were 3 gifts that were given to the Jewish people that they can only get through suffering. One is the Torah. Before we got the Torah, we had to go to Egypt. The second one is the land of Israel, which followed the 40 years in the desert. And the third one is the world to come. The next world will come through a lot of travail in this world. But Israel is one of the 3 gifts that was given to us, the Talmud says. All of our prayers... All of our prayers go through Israel. When a Jew prays in Buffalo, we're facing the land of Israel, we're facing Jerusalem, we're facing the Holy Temple, and our prayers travel all the way to Israel, and from there they go up to heaven. Again, how to explain that and understand that is for another time. But all of our prayers must go through Israel. The Talmud says those who live in Israel will inherit the world to come. Just by living there, you're fulfilling a mitzvah. Whether you have an obligation or not is not the issue. The issue is living in Israel is considered to be a virtue, just living there. The Talmud says that when God created the world, the first thing he created was Israel. And from there he spread it to the rest of the world. Which means, among other things, is that Israel is the first and most important thing in God's mind, more than any other place on earth. And within Israel itself, Jerusalem has a special place, and the Temple Mount has a special place as well. The Talmud says, and Maimonides codifies this, that if you live in Israel, you're not allowed to leave Israel, except for limited things, for livelihood, to study Torah, to get married, but just to leave Israel, but like this, you have to have a real justification for it. And the Midrash, as I mentioned in an earlier class, compares Israel to the custom-made suit that was designed just for one person and it doesn't fit anyone else. Israel was custom-made for the Jewish people. And if you need any proof of that, without going back to ancient history for thousands of years, no one was able to colonize Israel. It didn't fit anyone. Just look at what happened in Gaza. Israel gave Gaza to the terrorists. Gave the entire Gaza to them. Withdrew everything. Took a beautiful place, Gush Katif, productive, thriving place with their agriculture, and gave it to them. And what did they make out of it? Refugee camps. Refugee camps? They're there for decades. Why don't you build houses for them? Why don't you build cities for them so they can dwell? Well, what do they do with the concrete that was given to them, pressured by the United States and other countries? Giving them this concrete, they have to build homes. They build tunnels to murder people. They can't turn it into a thriving land. The only reason, and this is one of the arguments for Israel, although it's not a perfect argument, but it's an argument, that the reason why the Arabs came to Israel, they're not from Israel. They came from Egypt, from Syria, from Jordan. They came from other countries because Jews settled the land, and the land became, from a desert, it started blooming, and it turned into a productive country, a thriving country. So they wanted to enjoy the benefits, the profits. So they moved to Israel. Now, Israel, how was it referred to today? Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. I'm very unhappy with that designation. Israel is known as Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. A Medina, a state, limits what Israel really is. Because what they try to do with the state of Israel is to legitimize Israel in a secular context. But when you do that, you misrepresented what Israel really is. Israel is not a state. Israel is a land, and the ultimate land. Yes?
I don't understand. Nobody says, the state of Turkey, the state of England. I don't understand why it's always the state of Israel.
We're the United States, but not the state of United or the state of America. You're right. That's right. What is this idea of state of Israel? I never could understand why they had to use, and some Jews will only use that term. But it's sad because you reduced Israel to a country like every other country, and it cannot survive as a country like every other country. Israel can only survive if it lives up to its true nature, that it is a land of Israel, a holy land, a unique land, a Jewish land, and it's different from every other country in the world. In an earlier class, I'm going to repeat it now also, the very first comment of Rashi is a question that he asks: why does the Torah begin with the story of creation and the whole book of Genesis, which is stories, history? Torah is a book of laws. What's the law? What's the guidance? What's the instruction in knowing Genesis? And Rashi answers, it's to give us the knowledge how to respond to the nations of the world who call us thieves for taking the land. And the Rebbe once asked, why do the nations of the world call us thieves when they conquer as well? And why do they care so much about just that one little sliver of land that they're so upset, oh, we stole that land. What about every other place on earth? Why don't they complain about those? And the answer is they're not complaining that we conquered a land the way other countries conquered the land. That when we settled Israel, we transformed its very nature. It's not like any other country on earth. It's a country that has a certain spiritual dimension to it, and that spiritual dimension only fits the Jewish people because they also have a spiritual dimension that parallels the spiritual dimension of Israel. It's the suit that was tailor-made just for the Jewish people. Nobody else could really colonize it and settle it and turn it into anything meaningful because it doesn't fit. That's what they're so upset about, that we transformed Israel into something else unlike any other country on earth. And the answer to that is, who created the land? Who created the world? God did it. And He created the nature of every place on earth. He created that Buffalo should have a very warm climate. It's a delightful place to live, especially in January, February. He created places with terrible heat like Florida, unbearable heat. Who would want to live in Florida? I don't know any Jews who live in Florida. But God created, seriously speaking, He created every place in the world with its unique character. And there are no two places that are really alike. And He created Israel with a unique character that no place on earth could compare to Israel. And no place on earth is as connected to the Jewish people as Israel is. So what is Israel? How do we define Israel? I used the letter H. Israel is our homeland. Israel is our land of hope. It was, and it still is. And Israel is our holy land. And these three are intertwined. If you separate one from the other, you ruin Israel's uniqueness. Every country, every nation, Maharal, one of the great Jewish Kabbalists and philosophers of the 16th century, explains that every nation deserves to have a home. Not only the Jews, every nation deserves to have a home. Doesn't always work out that way, but they deserve it. Why do you need a home? Because just like a family needs to have a home, Because without a home, the family is disjointed, they're disconnected, there's no cohesiveness. If you want a family to thrive, they have to have a place that can be called their home. If you're just one individual, you don't really need a home that much. You need a place to shelter, but you don't need a home. The definition of a home is a place where it brings cohesiveness to a group of people who are like-minded, who have a connection to one another. But it goes beyond that. A home is where you are who you really are. A home defines your essence. When you're outside of your home, when we're outside of our homes, we are on a stage. We're behaving in a way, the way it should be, in a proper way, because we have to deal with other people. So we have to dress properly, we have to speak properly, we have to act properly. Which is not maybe the way we really feel like acting or the way we feel like speaking. When you're home, you feel you can do whatever you want. You can wear whatever clothing you want or not. You could act any way you want. Now, that doesn't mean that you should in your home, but your home is where you feel yourself. You're comfortable with yourself. So the home really defines your essence. This is who I really am. So a person who's very careful, let's say that they don't curse when they're in public, but in their home they curse all the time, that's a bad sign, because that shows that that's who you are. You're defined by the way you behave when no one else is around. So it's a good thing that we have a public life, because that tames us a little bit, that controls us a little. But when you're in your home, that means that's who you really are. So when we talk about Israel as the Jewish homeland, what it's saying is that Israel defines who we really are. And who are we really? We are a chosen people, chosen by God at Mount Sinai, given us the Torah. And Israel is the land in which it is most convenient or most capable of living that holy life. The Holy Land is the best place in the world where we can express our holiness. And when Jews didn't act that way, when Jews didn't act holy, what happened to those Jews during the first temple era? The Torah describes, the prophets describes how the land spit them out. They were exiled. The Babylonians destroyed the temple, and the Jews were all exiled. Most of them were exiled. Same thing happened 500 years later. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans, and it spit them out. Why? Because we were not living in consonance with being a holy people. So the Holy Land, we couldn't fit into it. You can't be in your home if you don't act the way the home was designed. Israel was designed differently from any other country. You could live in Mexico and behave the way the cartels behave, and Mexico doesn't spit them out, unfortunately. But Jews cannot survive in Israel without the Torah. And as powerful as their army, and tragically we learned this lesson, Israel's army was considered to be probably the best army in the world, the best air force in the world, the best intelligence in the world. And a bunch of evil terrorists, a few thousand of them, were able to wreak havoc on us. I think God was telling us, don't rely on your army alone. Don't rely on your intelligence alone. You are vulnerable, and it's a time for you to strengthen your Judaism and your connection to the Holy Land by being a holy people. And you know what? Tragically, it worked. God's message was heard by the Jews. So many tens of thousands of so-called secular Jews started to observe Judaism, started to put on tzitzis, men putting on tefillin, women dressing more modestly, lighting Shabbos candles before Shabbat. There's a major revolution in Israel, a religious revolution in Israel. My prayer is that it will continue after they get rid of the evil. When things go well, it's easier for people to relapse, but let's hope that it doesn't, that it gets stronger and stronger. just a few days or weeks or months before this event, you know what was going on in Israel? There was almost a civil war. The secular were at the throats of the religious, and the religious were fighting against the secular. It was horrible. It was very painful to see. And the Arabs noted that. They said that they took advantage of that, of Israel's weakness, of its vulnerability because of the division. Now that has reversed, this tremendous unity in Israel. And this unity is not just unity because we're all Jews, we're all in it together, but it's also part of a spiritual revival. And let's hope that this spiritual revival of Israel, the message sent to here in Buffalo and throughout the world as well. In America, we're a little bit indifferent because it hasn't struck us. Thank God it hasn't struck us as strongly as it did. And it has struck us. You go to universities, read the media, listen to the news, and you see how slanted it is. And you know what the media will tell you? Oh, we got criticized by the Arabs as well for being slanted towards Israel. What does that mean? It means because we don't condemn Israel and we criticize what Hamas did, that means you're slanted towards Israel. But that's the way, that doesn't make it right. You know, I always hear this from media people. I must be doing something right because I get criticized by both sides. That doesn't prove you're right. It just proves that you have no backbone. You're not willing to take a side when you see the truth is on one side. A media person doesn't have to be objective when there's no objectivity. When Hamas murders thousands of Jews, you're objective about it and say, well, there's some nuance there. It's complex. That's called misrepresenting the truth. Yes, there are some disputes where you can't take a side because it's not so clear. But if this is not clear, what is clear? But Israel is the Jewish homeland, which means that even if you never stepped foot in Israel, you are in Israel if you just ever said a prayer to God. Because that prayer was directed towards Israel. The Baal Shem Tov once said, maybe more than once, where is a person? What does that mean, where is a person? Someone asked me, where am I now? I'd say, I'm in Buffalo, Amherst, Jewish Discovery Center. No, that's not what it means. Where is really a person? A person is where their will is, where they want to be. If I want to be in Jerusalem right now, then I am in Jerusalem. I'm not here. Yeah, my body is here, but my mind and my soul is in Jerusalem. The famous Jewish poet and philosopher, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, famously wrote, I am in the west, but my heart is in the east. West was Spain, Morocco, and his heart was in the east. So where was he? He was in the east. You could live in Israel, tragically, and you could be thinking about American culture, and your mind is in Hollywood. Well, then you're not really in Israel. Your body is there. Maybe that's something to say about that. That's also a positive thing. But your soul is not there, so you're not really there. So every Jew throughout history lived in Israel, even if they never stepped foot on the land physically. Because that's what we prayed for 3 times a day, minimally. We want to be back in Israel. That's where our mind was. That's where our heart was. That's where our soul was. So the Jew who cares about Israel and prays for anything is really there, is really in Israel. That's our homeland. That defines who we are. Israel defines our essence. Israel was always something that Jews hoped for. It's an incredible thing, and people don't appreciate this enough. For thousands of years, the possibility of Jews returning to Israel en masse was nil. How could that happen? Every empire did not let us go back to Israel. And someone said before World War I, in order for the Jews to be able to, this is after the whole Zionist movement, started this whole movement towards Israel, someone said, I don't remember who it was, maybe someone here remembers, that in order for that to happen, 3 empires have to crumble. The British Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. What is the likelihood of 3 empires like this crumbling? And they all crumbled. And Jews were able to return to Israel in great numbers and control the land for better or for worse. This is a proof of how when Jews had hope, hope was not a vain thing. It was not just a dream, a pipe dream. It was more than a pipe dream. Jews were always connected to Israel. What's the word for hope in Hebrew? Tikva. Tikva. What's the root of the word tikva? There's a word in Hebrew, kav. Kav means a line. A line, a connection. When you have hope, even though you're so disconnected from that reality, but if you have hope, you create a line, a hook that connects you to that ideal, whatever it may be. Also the word mikvah, the same root, mikvah, tikva. Mikvah is what is a mikvah? A mikvah is a ritual bath. And it has been compared to the womb, the amniotic fluid in the womb, that when you go to the mikvah, you're rejuvenated because you go back to your birth fluid, that you're immersed in the source of life. And that's what Israel was for Jews. It wasn't just a hope, we're going to have our own country with our own army, but it was to be connected to this holy land, a land in which we will be purified and made holy. Yes?
Is that Kuf Vav Hey?
Same spelling. Mikvah. Actually, there's a verse that says, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. God is the mikveh of the Jewish people. And it has 2 meanings. The simple meaning is we're the hope. God is the hope of Israel. But it also means God is the source of purification of Israel. So our hope to go back to Israel for thousands of years was both the line that connected us to Israel, but it was also the line that purified us. A Jew who wanted to go to Israel was bathing in that, in the womb, in the amniotic fluid, spiritually speaking. And that itself was a purifying element. So if anyone has to argue about our right to Israel, it might be an exercise in futility. Depends who you are arguing with. If you're talking to a reasonable person who has been brainwashed by the media and by the social media, which is even worse than the media in general, because the social media has absolutely no limits and no controls. And they just tell you, they just repeat the same canards. Occupied land, apartheid. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Genocide. It's futile to argue with these people unless they're ignorant and they are willing to be educated. Then you can talk to them. But it always has to begin and end with the idea that Jewish people are connected to this land, and nothing will change that. And if the anti-Semites of the world say that they're going to get rid of us, say, look, you're not the first people who came along who had that desire. Every nation subjugated us, wanted us dead or completely paralyzed. Egypt, Philistines, Amalekites, Canaanites, I said Philistines, which, by the way, is where Gaza is the land of the Philistines. And what does the word Philistine mean? Plishtim. And likewise the word Palestinian. It means invaders. People who don't belong there, who invade, who make incursions into the land. They describe themselves very well. They are invaders. They don't belong there, but they've invaded our land. So they try to destroy us, and then later on the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Germans, the Russians, every single empire in the world, the British, everyone did something to harm the Jewish people, either by genocidal desire, or to subjugate us, imprison us, or to expel us. So, and we overcame them, and they are now footnotes in history, and we're still here strong, and we're going stronger and stronger. So if they're smart, they'll recognize that it's better to be on the good side of the Jewish people.
They're not smart.
But they're not smart. But even if we can convince one person to become smart, it's worth it, yes.
I have a question that's a little off. I don't know why it popped into my mind, but isn't there a teaching in Judaism that a prophet is buried in the land of Israel? And isn't the Rabbi considered a prophet?
And
So I'm just wondering why isn't
a prophet has to be buried in Israel?
Yeah, so I don't mean to, I'm just curious.
No, there's no law that a prophet has to be buried in Israel. No. Yes.
I thought in a previous class, you said something like Abraham purchased
the cave of Machpelah in which he buried his wife Sarah. And the reason he purchased it is even though God promised the land to him, he didn't want there to be any challenge to his right over the land. So he said, I'm going to pay full amount. That's one place. King David did the same thing with the Temple Mount. He paid for it the full price. He didn't try to bargain. He didn't try to haggle. I don't want anyone to think that we didn't purchase it. It's not really ours. And Jacob, earlier than that, also purchased the city of Shechem, Nablus, which they call. And those are the three most contested places in Israel. So what does that tell you? Trying to do things the way the world, outside world, demands of you doesn't get you any brownie points, doesn't help you at all. We're better off not giving in to the demands of the world. If you behaved yourself in a certain way, if you acted like this, we don't have to be told how to act. We are the moral teachers of the world. The Jewish people are the moral teachers of the world. I don't have to look to the UN to tell me how to behave. Yes?
Rabbi, one of the main issues that the Palestinians and the Arab world have with the Jews, and I say the Jews because the idea of saying Israel, this is about Jews. It's not just Israel, it's Jews, period.
Obviously.
And one of the main issues that they have is, and on the surface it's legitimate, that we have displaced the Palestinians from their homeland. What I wanted to say is that in the late 1860s or 70s, our famous writer, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, spent extensive time in Israel, and he documented the status of the land.
How barren it was.
And what Mark Twain had to say was that the land was so sparsely inhabited, and where it was inhabited, it was all by Bedouin tribesmen. There were no cities, there was no society, it was just desert, wasteland, and this has been documented throughout. And the first Aliyah began at around the 1880s, very soon after Mark Twain, where Jews started buying the land from absentee owners. There was no one there. It was absentee ownership, mostly Turks and some Arabs. And the Jews began buying the land during the first Aliyah. But they were not displacing people. But the Jews turned the desert where they were buying the land, and this was spurred on by Zionism. And they turned the land into something special. And this continued and continued. And as time went on, the settlers around, towns, some of them sought employment from the Jews because they were developing.
Right, I mentioned that before, yeah.
They were getting health care. They brought health care to the area. But there wasn't a Palestinian settlements. That's a canard. That's all nonsense.
Right,
That's all said. This is all late state stuff. That's bull.
Right, okay, we have some other
I want
Yes.
two things. The first is to go back to your moral. That's why they hate us. All right? We're the sanctimonious heretics who keep telling them that you can't kill people, you can't rob, you can't rape, you can't do all that stuff. We're constantly reminding them that they should be moral people. They don't like being reminded of that. Their cultures are, many of them are based on slightly immoral things. So they hate us because we are, people.
They hate us for a lot of reasons.
But that is like, and nobody wants that person who keeps looking at them saying, and that's what we do. I mean, we try to make them good people.
Right.
The other thing is, when Turkey was the Ottoman Empire was breaking up, and they saw what was going on, and they knew about the whole new movement. They moved. Bosnia, as you know, is Muslim, and they moved an entire group, they forcibly resettled an entire group of Bosnians to Israel, so that there would be a Muslim population. They forced them there, they made their homes there, and the largest percentage of what the Palestinians are actually Bosnian descent. That's when they say, our family has been here for 10 generations, or probably by now 11 generations. It's because they got there when the Ottoman Empire moved them there.
Right. All these arguments
no right
are all valid arguments, but there are counter-arguments that they're going to raise to these arguments. And I'm not saying that they're right. I'm just saying that we have to know what our main argument is, that this is the land that was given to us and will always be our land, and they'll never drive us out, and we'll never relinquish that right. And if they know, one of the problems that why the Arabs are doing what they're doing, because we let them know that we want to give them a state. We're talking about the two-state solution. That's the most dangerous thing, because you see, all the Arab countries want to make peace with Israel. They're sick and tired of the Palestinians, but the West is pushing it on them, saying no, two-state solution, and the American government is guilty of that. We tried this for 50 years; it didn't work. It's insanity to keep on talking about a two-state solution. They're not ready for a state. They had their state in Gaza. Why didn't they build up a beautiful, productive society? Why didn't they make a port? Why didn't they build housing for the so-called refugees? They still have refugee camps.
That's the other thing. Isn't the entire place?
And the UN is the UN, the evil UN in Gaza are supporters of mass murder. They are not much better than the Arabs themselves, who are guilty. They went along with this. So we can't give them the impression that we're civilized and we're going to give them a state. Yes, a state they have to have with this. They can have an organized army. They can attack us from all directions.
Maybe they could have Jordan. Since that was the desert.
That's not Israel's problems. As people say, well, what are you going to do with the Palestinians? Says, what are you going to do? Why don't you solve the problem? Take them into your home. How many Palestinians are willing to take in your home? If every American who tells Israel to give them a state would say, I'm going to take 12 Palestinians to my home, then that would solve the problem. But it's not their problem, and it's not Israel's problem. Let Jordan, let Egypt, let Saudi Arabia, let them find the solution. And if people stop talking about two states, because Hamas doesn't talk about two-state solution,
one state,
and Abbas, who talks about it, doesn't believe in himself. It's only a stepping stone. The only difference between Hamas and Abbas, they both rhyme, but the only real difference is that Abbas says we'll get some of the land now, and then we'll get the rest later by attacking them when they'll be weaker. Hamas says, no, we're not going to compromise even temporarily. We're going to get it all. And if it takes time, we'll wait, and we'll attack them. And they have in mind to do this again and again and again.
They already said that.
And they said it. And I believe them. You know what? That's one thing, they don't lie when they say that how much evil they want to do. That's the one thing they're honest about. But we have to be strong in knowing that we are right, that we are the holy people, and that we belong in the Holy Land, and behave holy, and strengthen our own trust and faith in God, strengthen our own Judaism, and more of Jewish unity. That's the power that we have. This Shabbos,